Good afternoon and welcome to the 2024 semifinals of the National Tourism Debate Competition. We have with us this afternoon two outstanding schools, our 2023 national champions, Knox College and Ardenne High. The motion reads, this House believes that workers in the tourism sector should be restricted in their ability to strike as it disrupts the tourism sector, which is an integral part of the Jamaican economy. We would like to thank our sponsors, Fontana Pharmacy, Moon Palace Resorts, Royalton Resorts, Pier 1, Ward's Transportation, and the GHTA. We have with us this afternoon our esteemed judges, Malik Kalia, attorney at law, Safari Hilton, businessman and former director, Gavin Watt, representing the Jamaica Observer. Proposing the motion is Knox College and opposing the motion is Ardenne High. The first speaker is allowed 7 minutes, second speaker 5 minutes, and third speaker 3 minutes, followed by a rebuttal, which will begin with the opposing team. Let's meet our speakers from Knox College, Janae Scott, Summer Anderson, and Corian Taylor. With us is Ardenne High, Lee Terry, Duman, Lavon Brown, and Regina Ellis. We will now begin with our proposing team, Knox College. Knox College, please proceed to your podium.
Esteemed judges, members of this honorable house, my worthy opponents, good afternoon. My designation is Janae Scott, and it is with great pride that I rise as the Prime Minister of this honorable house. The motion before us is, this House believes that workers in the tourism sector should be restricted in their ability to strike as it disrupts the tourism sector, which is an integral part of the Jamaican economy. As the Prime Minister, it is my responsibility to define the key terms of this motion, establish the critical role tourism plays in Jamaica's economy, and present substantive arguments as to why restricting strikes in this sector is a necessary and reasonable policy. My Deputy Prime Minister will highlight the economic importance of Jamaica's tourism sector, the negative consequences of strikes, and the benefits of alternative dispute resolution methods like mediation and arbitration, and argue that restricting the freedom to strike enhances international competitiveness while addressing concerns about workers' freedoms, safety, and economic sustainability. My third speaker will emphasize the importance of the tourism economy to Jamaica's economic stability and introduce the Swedish model as a possible strategy Jamaica can utilize, ultimately proving why we provided the more substantive arguments worthy of winning the debate. Mr. Speaker, we are not saying that the freedom to strike should be removed. However, we are simply calling for a restriction on this freedom in order to protect the financial stability of our country. Mr. Speaker, the key terms of this motion are restricted and integral. Restricted refers to limitations placed on the ability of workers in the tourism sector to engage in strike action, including but not limited to prohibiting strikes during peak tourist seasons, requiring a minimum notice period for strike action, limiting the number of workers who can participate in a strike, and establishing a mandatory arbitration or mediation process to resolve disputes before strike action can be taken. Integral means that tourism is essential to Jamaica's economic stability, providing thousands of jobs and contributing significantly to GDP. That being said, why is restricting strikes in the tourism sector necessary? Mr. Speaker, it is indisputable that tourism is the backbone of Jamaica's economy. According to reports from the Jamaica Tourist Board, the industry accounts for nearly 30% of the country's GDP and employs over 170,000 Jamaicans directly, with thousands more benefiting indirectly from the sector in areas such as agriculture, transportation, and entertainment. The government has also invested millions in tourism infrastructure, and international investors continue to pump foreign direct investments into the sector. In 2023 alone, FDI in Jamaica's tourism industry reached a staggering 575 million USD, a testament to the confidence that investors have in Jamaica's tourism market. Additionally, Jamaica's tourism boom is expected to continue, with visitors' arrivals increasing annually. A thriving tourism industry means foreign exchange, more business for local farmers, and more opportunities for small entrepreneurs. However, the industry's success depends on reliability and service quality. When workers in this sector strike, it leads to disruptions in hotel services, leading to negative international reviews, transportation failures causing tourists to miss flights or excursions, inconsistent food and hospitality services, damaging Jamaica's reputation as a world-class tourist destination. Strikes also result in the loss of investors and reduced tourism revenue. Mr. Speaker, this is not just a hypothetical. Recent hotel strikes have already shaken the industry, causing significant financial losses and damaging international trust in Jamaica as a reliable destination. The opposition may argue that striking is a fundamental right. However, according to the Jamaica Information Services, there is no real right to strike, but workers instead have the freedom to strike, which is protected under the Labor Relations and Industrial Dispute Act. They may also say that restricting strikes is unfair and prevents workers from negotiating better wages and working conditions. Mr. Speaker, we are not calling for an outright ban on striking. We are calling for a responsible regulation which creates a balance between our integral hotel industry and its integral workers. This ensures that strikes do not cripple an industry that supports the livelihoods of thousands of Jamaicans. Let us remember that Jamaica already places restrictions on strikes in essential services such as healthcare, education, and public utilities. This is because these sectors are too vital to be disrupted. Tourism is just as critical. Furthermore, the LRIDA already imposes procedures for strike action, such as providing written notice to employers and the Minister of Labor, attempting mediation before striking, and conducting a secret ballot among union members. We propose strengthening these existing laws to ensure that strikes do not unnecessarily harm the tourism sector. Countries like Singapore and Dubai have strong labor protections that provide alternative dispute resolution mechanisms instead of strikes. These countries recognize that certain industries are too critical to be disrupted. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the government proposes the following model so that we can achieve the same desirable outcomes as the aforementioned countries. This model aims to strike a balance between restricting workers' abilities to strike and protecting their rights to fair wages and safe working conditions. Here's how our model will look. Firstly, the arbitration agreement. Parties would agree to resolve disputes through arbitration as per their contracts. Appointment of arbitrators. Impartial arbitrators would be appointed, and these would be experts in the tourism sector. Arbitration proceedings would be confidential, and parties would be required to present their cases in a timely and efficient manner. Arbitration awards would be allotted, and the arbitrator's decision would be binding and enforceable under Jamaican law, ensuring efficient and effective dispute resolution without resorting to strikes. Mr. Speaker, by adopting this model, Jamaica's tourism sector can benefit from efficient and effective dispute resolution, minimizing the impact of strikes on the economy and the hotel workers themselves. When workers know that their concerns will be addressed without strikes, they will be less likely to resort to them. The fact is this, Mr. Speaker, when strikes occur in tourism, they do not just affect hotel owners or the government, they create a domino effect impacting linkage industries such as farmers who supply local hotels, taxi drivers and tour guides, and ordinary Jamaicans who depend on the industry's revenue, hence creating a ripple effect in the national economy. Mr. Speaker, this is not a debate about whether workers should have rights. Of course they should. This is a debate about whether the freedom to strike should be unlimited, even at the cost of national economic stability. We believe that tourism is too important and too integral to Jamaica's future to be left vulnerable to frequent and disruptive strikes. By implementing reasonable restrictions, just as we do in other essential sectors, we can protect both the freedoms of workers and the stability of our economy. The government yields the floor.
Ardenne, hi, please go ahead.
All protocols observed. Mr. Speaker, before I even begin with my opening statements, the proposition has misguided the House, and there are some salient points that I would love to address. The government says that they are simply calling for a restriction on the tourism workers' freedom to strike. But let's be clear, any restriction on any freedom is the government acting outside of their barriers, outside of their boundaries, and that in and of itself is ultra vires to what is in the Constitution. They talk about the fact that the JIS says that there is no right to strike. Go ahead.
There is no right given to these workers to strike. What the government is able to do is able to do anything regulatively in order to ensure the betterment of the people. If these strikes are detrimental to the people, then are they not allowed to interfere?
Which, can you repeat the POI, please? Or a rephrase?
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right. So the government says they're gonna regulate strikes. But regulating strikes does not mean banning them, though. I mean, when workers have a structural and legal way to process it, reduces the likelihood of other unregulated disruptions. And we have to remember that the unpredictable. Denied. Continuing. Yes. We must also remember that negotiations that are had still fall through the cracks, and these can take up to 10 plus years. An example of these are teachers, right? Teachers can negotiate from time to time, but let's be clear, if the minister fails to bring up the actual issue to them, it does not remove the risk of strikes taking place. They also talk about essential workers, but let us be clear, tourism workers are not essential workers. What is a criteria of an essential worker? An essential worker must be providing you with light, water, food, cable, any form of security like our police, any form of healthcare like our doctors, any form of education like our teachers. Those are essential workers. They have restrictions and strikes. Denied. So today, we face a motion that seeks to strip workers in the tourism sector of their fundamental right to strike, all in the name of supposed economic stability. And while the government will attempt to convince you that it is a necessary sacrifice, Mr. Speaker, let's call it what it is. It is an economic strong-arm tactic that prioritizes profit over people and inhumane working conditions over the livelihood of their workers. I, as the first speaker, will be defining opposition stance. I decline. My second colleague will look at the economic impacts of restricting strikes as well as questioning the effectiveness of the government strategy, whilst my third speaker will speak to the exploitation by multinational corporations and local entities. Thus, we as side opposition provide a counter policy which we believe provides fairness to all. We believe in a mandatory 15 to 20% wage increase for tourism workers. Now, tourism drives 30% of our gross domestic product, and it employs approximately 400,000 Jamaicans. Yet many workers still earn near the $15,000 weekly minimum wage. And if strikes are restricted, a mandatory 15 to 20% wage increase must be enforced to compensate for the lost bargaining power. We also believe in a legally required profit sharing of 5 to 8% for large tourism companies. Now, with tourism earnings at 671 billion Jamaican dollars in 2024, with 40% staying in Jamaica, which is around 268 billion Jamaican dollars, as said by Minister Bartlett in the Jamaica Information Service, large companies earning at least 1 billion Jamaican dollars annually should allocate 5 to 8% of net profits to frontline workers. The opposition also believes in creating a 3 billion Jamaican dollars tourism worker welfare fund for emergency assistance.
Point of information.
This fund, go ahead.
You stated that negotiations are a lengthy period of time, but are we not also giving alternative methods that are proven to be more effective than strike action?
Hello?
I said You mentioned negotiations. However, we have already stated previously that there are also many other alternative measures that we would like to prioritize because these are more effective than strikes, as have been proven time and time again.
Okay, well, and that's lovely, and we're glad to see that the government agrees with us that strikes should be a last resort option. So thank you for agreeing with us on that point. But let us be clear, we do not intend to restrict strikes. And if we continue listening to the rest of the opposition's policy, you will hear further down what else we are proposing as it relates to having strikes, but also putting it forward as a last resort option. Mr. Speaker, on the $3 billion Jamaican dollars welfare fund, just 1% of retained earnings should be established to support the displaced workers, provide income relief, legal aid, and retraining. We also believe in mandatory arbitration, just like side government, and we are happy to see that side government believes in other methods. Mandatory arbitration with a 90-day resolution deadline. So with 70% of industrial disputes linked to unfair dismissals and unpaid wages, employers must undergo at least 2 rounds of mandatory arbitration with a 90-day resolution deadline. There must also be cost of living adjustments for workers in high tourism zones. We also believe in the establishment of a tourism workers' rights ombudsman and a commission of inquiry, which would oversee labor grievances and investigations under an amended Commissions of Inquiry Act, ensuring findings lead to policy enforcement. And we also believe in an independent labor relations board, which will mediate disputes, fast-track arbitration, and enforce industry-wide standards to prevent worker exploitation under strike restrictions. So today we stand firm in opposing this motion on the grounds that industrial action cannot be silent and that it violates workers' constitutional rights and freedoms. And trust me, by the time we're done, not even Ray and Nephew denied, not even Ray and Nephew are going to fix the headache this government will have. Now, before dismantling their case, let's be clear, industrial action is not just striking. If strikes are not restricted, workers will turn to other forms of protest. And restriction is not resolution. Silencing strikes won't erase frustration. It will redirect it. So will the government ban protest next? Will they ban slow service? Will they, what, silence? Where does it end? Because the government will then have to prepare itself for the ripple effects of these industrial actions, such as picketing, go slows, work to rule, overtime bans, task refusals, and lockout, which are inevitable. Because let us be clear, industrial action is a powerful tool and restricting it weakens workers' bargaining power. And it is the height of hypocrisy for a service-based industry to refuse to serve its own workers first. So to Knox College, the misguided government of this honorable house, I say draw brakes and take caution. You see those same seats you got elected to? Kiss them goodbye and pack your bags and go, because your argument is a hazard to logic. Now, the right to strike or the freedom to strike, it is not just some inconvenient disruption. It is a constitutional and international human right. Section 13, subsection E, subsection 3, part E of the Jamaican Constitution guarantees, and I quote, the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, which includes trade unions and collective bargaining. Additionally, Jamaica is a signatory to the International Labour Organization Convention number 87, which upholds workers' rights to organize and take industrial action. Yet the government, in their rush to protect tourism dollars, wants to trample on the very rights that protect the workers who sustain the industry. Mr. Speaker, we must ask, if these workers can't strike, how will they demand better wages, improved conditions, and fair treatment? And why do other sectors strike? Because negotiation without pressure is just a polite request, and the government knows it. With that, Mr. Speaker, I rest my case.
Thank you very much. We will now move over to Knox College. Second speaker.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, to briefly briefly rebut some fallacies posited by my opponents, there is actually no constitutional right permitting these workers the ability to strike. It is a constitutional freedom, and for that we say that they are misguided in their assumptions. Mr. Speaker, esteemed judges and members of this House, I open by first reaffirming that Jamaica does not have the luxury of economic recklessness. Our tourism industry is an integral sector that supplies labor and funds Jamaica's developmental efforts consistently and effectively. This industry generates over 3.7 billion USD annually. It directly employs 170,000 Jamaicans and indirectly supports hundreds of thousands more. More than 50% of our foreign exchange earnings, Mr. Speaker, the money that keeps our hospitals sponsored, our schools funded, and our infrastructure intact comes from this singular sector. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it becomes evident that for a developing nation like Jamaica to maintain its current trends of development, this industry must be safeguarded. And to do so, the ability to strike must be reasonably regulated to prevent devastating economic consequences from impacting the industry and, more importantly, its workers. Mr. Speaker, let us establish that a collapsing tourism sector means layoffs. It means economic stagnation in other essential sectors, and it means upended livelihoods as a direct result of industrial unrest. Mr. Speaker, it is easy for the opposition to advocate
Point of information.
accepted.
All right, so you're saying that we must prioritize the rights of the Jamaicans who depend on a stable tourism industry, and we understand that. But what about the workers' rights? And then you also did
The
state
workers are still able
that
to lobby for their rights.
consequences-
We're not removing the right to strike. We're regulating it so it doesn't kill them. So they still have the ability to work in the industry. To continue now, Mr. Speaker, it is easy for the opposition to advocate for unrestricted striking freedoms, but they should be realistic. And if they were, they would realize that Jamaica's economic position does not afford us such a luxury. Mr. Speaker, a strike in the tourism sector does not function like a strike in other industries like manufacturing or retail. If factory workers strike today, production resumes tomorrow and profits can be regained far easier than in other industries. If hotel workers strike today, Mr. Speaker, the revenue loss is immense and it's far harder to reimburse. According to the Jamaican Observer, when our air traffic controllers walked off the job in 2022, Norman Manley and Sangster International airports were forced to shut down. And this stranded thousands of tourists and cost the country millions in
point of information.
Accepted?
You stated that you are not removing the right, however, you're regulating it. However, your first speaker stated that it's not a right that they have to strike, however, a freedom. What's the difference and what exactly are you trying to?
Yes, there is no right for them to strike. So there is no constitutional misuse being taken place here. We're not removing any rights from these workers directly. To continue now, there was no phased action, no intermittency, and yes, this was an effective but economically debilitating strike. The lost revenue, Mr. Speaker, put the sector in a mode of recovery that involved wage reductions and employee layoffs. So all was for naught ultimately. Mr. Speaker, tourists do not gamble with uncertainty. Once Jamaica is seen as unreliable, we do not just lose one set of visitors, we lose our reputation, the trust in our brand as a quality tourist hotspot, and we devalue the professionalism of the Jamaican tourism product. Mr. Speaker, major hotel chains will begin redirecting their expansion plans to our opponents. International airlines will reconsider their routes. Investors will hesitate. And all of this, Mr. Speaker, is not something that Jamaica has the economic ability to withhold. Mr. Speaker, this is not a hypothetical situation. It is a pattern that has been observed. The Bahamas itself saw a 10% drop in tourist arrivals after extended hotel strikes, forcing staff cuts and wage reductions, the very things those workers were fighting against. France, Mr. Speaker, a country with a far more robust economy, still suffered over 200 million euros in tourism losses due to lengthy strike action. Even months later, the businesses within this flourishing country were struggling to recover. Now, consider this within the Jamaican context. Jamaica is a developing nation with fewer resources and a heavier reliance on its tourism industry. If we allow unregulated striker action in this essential sector, the consequences will be detrimental. Mr. Speaker, let us remind the opposing house that when a strike cripples the tourism sector, its repercussions extend far beyond the workers or the government. Powerful multinational corporations have both the resources and the incentive to safeguard their financial interests primarily. Mr. Speaker, they will recover, but who will suffer in the interim? But the average Jamaican worker protesting for the higher wages. Mr. Speaker, they are the ones who will face the wage cuts, the mass layoffs, and the dwindling job security as these businesses scramble to recover their losses. Mr. Speaker, when millions are drained from the economy due to industrial actions like strikes when left unregulated, the very social programs meant to protect these workers in times of economic crisis become overburdened and underfunded. Mr. Speaker, this leaves them with nowhere to turn. And considering that larger economies like Singapore and even Germany still opt to regulate their strikes in essential sectors to balance stability and workers' rights, we must say, why would Jamaica not opt to do the same? In the long run, Mr. Speaker, the opposition oversells the effectiveness of unregulated striker action while ignoring that it is a mere band-aid solution for a deeper structural issue. In Jamaica, workers will still remain reliant on harsh industrial action, only to suffer the same consequences they sought to avoid if the structural issues are left unaddressed. Even Colin Virgo, Assistant General Secretary of the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union, acknowledged that the late 2024 hotel strike stemmed from primarily a lack of proper worker representation. As he put it, it's easier for a business to negotiate with a few representatives than to manage negotiations with hundreds of workers. Strikes, Mr. Speaker, have been proven to be short-term gains, but they fail to address long-term systemic issues, and additional issues rise in the long run. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sustainable change is what is required, not halting work unnecessarily. We demand strategic organization, lobbying, and alliances for these tourism workers. Instead of disrupting strikes, we would prioritize mediation and arbitration, as per the model posited by my Prime Minister. Faster, more structured, and ultimately more effective is the solution, Mr. Speaker. And on this, side proposition pauses momentarily.
All protocols observed. Now, before I am to begin with my speech, there are a few many things that the proposition has said that I would like to address. The first of which is the fact that proposition has been saying from their first to their second speaker that there is no right that the workers have to strike. But even if the proposition refuses to see the Constitution, then surely they must see Convention number 87 of the International Labour Organization, to which we as Jamaicans are signatories, that guarantee the right for workers to strike. And if they want to step aside from this, then they can. But when international organizations start retaliating against us and painting Jamaica as a country that is void of democracy as we violate our workers' rights, and travel advisories come and we further hurt our reputation, then they have been spying that they can protect. Badgering, it is still within the first minute of my speech. Now, there's also the second thing that I would like to address. The fact that the proposition has been trying to lie to us, to paint a picture of fear, that if we allow for workers to strike, then the reputation of our country shall go down the drain. But I find it saddening that the proposition has no faith in the ability of Jamaica to be able to pull in visitors. We saw that after the 2024 strike, something that the proposition should know very well, there was actually a record number of visitors in the winter break, it being put at 1.6 million by our Minister of Tourism, Honorable Edmund Barcellet. Now, I would also like to say that the proposition in trying to restrict the right to strike is only offering a superficial short-term solution. This picture of fear that they have been trying to paint, it makes no sense, Mr. Speaker, as it fails to address the fundamental rights or even the international rights that which our workers are guaranteed. This approach also fails to address the underlying issues that bring our workers to strike, such as low pay and inadequate working conditions, such as was said by my first speaker. This restriction will only make our workers feel disenfranchised, which shall hurt the workforce as they shall be demotivated from their productivity, ultimately losing productivity for the sector and hurting the quality of service. Mr. Speaker, proposition is offering nothing but a slow death for our tourism sector. Now, there is also the question of whether attempts at restricting strikes is even feasible. Historically, we know that when workers have been denied official means to protest, they will instead go to informal means, such as go slow, as was said by my first speaker. Now, the proposition may try to say that they will instead look at arbitration and mediation. Arbitration and mediation can be very timely, and without the threat of strikes, there is no way that we know that these things will go by quickly. And if these workers feel that they cannot strike and they start to turn to these invisible ways of protesting, and the tourists that you claim to be protecting by restricting strikes start to feel this diminished service, what will you say when the revisitation rate of our nation, being at 40%, starts to go down as people who experience this poorer quality of service due to the fact that the workers feel disenfranchised start to go to other nations instead.
Point of information.
Accepted.
Wouldn't we have already addressed all of this within our speech? We already told you that mediation and arbitration is a better solution than strike action in the first place.
You may be trying to say that is a better solution, but at the same time, unless you are going to find channels to ensure that they can, which I grant you, are legally enforceable, there is also the fact that arbitration mediation, which I just said, takes time. There's also the provision that you had mentioned that there has to be some failure of the minister to refer things to the Labour Industrial Board before you want to give workers the right to strike. These things take time, and it is very much that which had led to the CEO striking. And I would also like to touch on the point of essential workers. As my first speaker said, tourism workers are not essential workers. If tourism workers start striking, there may be a temporary loss in revenue, which even though it shall recover, such as in the 2024 strikes, there is nothing that the Jamaican people shall lose in their day-to-day lives. And there is also the fact that our tourism workers are already disadvantaged. So as much as their change will come, I cannot see it. What I can see is the case of Jamaica Pegasus Hotels Limited versus Bustamante Industrial Trade Union, where it took the effect of industrial action for change to take place. You can also look at the case of Excellent Oyster Bay. This is in the last minute, so not accepted. Where it was only after strikes that the workers saw such things such as increased benefits and more pay. With a worker directly saying, you might see us smiling with the guests and pretending that Jamaica, no problem. But we are suffering under bad treatment, disrespect, and low wages. Now, the proposition may say that change will come. But if there is no threat of strikes, then these companies shall feel emboldened to oppress our people. And those workers who feel oppressed may very well leave the sector and leave the nation without an industry that even has to fill 45,000 jobs as put down by our Minister of Tourism. Hence, I encourage the proposition that whilst their intention behind restricting strikes may be to prevent the immediate disruptions to our sector, these measures are inadequate and counterproductive to the long run, as our disenfranchised workers shall feel hopeless and firms feel empowered to oppress. Hence, they also fail to address the root causes of worker dissatisfaction, which are driving away skilled labor, conceal systematic issues that will ultimately harm the industry's sustainability, and also ensure that the invisible damages that are done by the workers due to their frustration shall never go addressed, and the shortage that we have shall never be filled. Hence, I urge the proposition to abandon their senseless motion of restricting strikes and instead join us their position in providing solutions like they have mentioned with arbitration and mediation and beyond, with the establishment of the ombudsman, such as mentioned by my first speaker, to create a Jamaica that is equitable and that our workers feel safeguarded to be productive so that our sector can continue to grow and not shrink. The opposition momentarily rests.
Marion Taylor, you may go ahead.
Honorable educators and esteemed opponents. Firstly, let me correct my opponents. The industry is integral, Mr. Speaker, and therefore the workers become integral for its sustainability. Furthermore, my first and second speakers would have emphasized that strike actions are band-aid solutions, which is ineffective in the long term. Mr. Speaker, it is with great confidence that I rise as the third speaker of the proposition to affirm why this House stands resolute in supporting the motion. Our first speaker emphasized the vital role of tourism, contributing nearly 30% of GDP and employing over 170,000 Jamaicans, making it the backbone of our economy. Our second speaker highlighted the need to balance workers' rights with economic sustainability through alternative dispute resolution mechanisms such as mediation and arbitration. Mr. Speaker, the tourism sector is not just another industry. It is the lifeline of Jamaica's economy. During the COVID-19 pandemics, the tourism sector lost over $76 billion, leaving thousands unemployed. While sporadic strikes may not last as long, over time, such strikes could devastate our economy at a similar scale. The cost of instability is too high. Restricting the ability to strike is responsible. Yes, workers have rights and freedoms, but so do the millions of Jamaicans who rely on a stable tourism sector. When hotels close and flights are delayed due to strikes, tourists cancel trips, revenue
Was of
plummets,
information.
disappear, not accepted. Ultimately, it is ordinary Jamaicans who bear the burden. We propose adopting Sweden's alternative dispute resolution model, where disputes are resolved through mediation and arbitration, with strikes as a last resort. Sweden's use of alternative dispute resolution has promoted economic stability and ensured efficient conflict resolution, enhancing its long-term economic resilience. This approach prioritizes dialogue, maintains economic stability, and protects both worker dignity and national sustainability. Jamaica must be proactive, not reactive, to prevent economic collapse. The opposition argues that restricting strikes violates labor laws. However, our model regulates, not eliminates, the ability to strike. Alternative dispute resolution offers a platform for grievances without crippling the economy. Moreover, financial disputes are not the sole cause of strike. Issues such as miscommunication and poor working conditions often fuel unrest. Sweden's model proves that structural negotiations yield better long-term results. Mr. Speaker, we share the opposition's goal of better wages and improved working conditions, but the difference lies in how we achieve it. The opposition calls for strikes, an action that repeatedly shows no long-term benefits for workers, while we advocate for constructive solutions that protect workers' rights and freedoms of expression. Our approach ensures that everyone wins: the workers, the economy, and the nation. For these reasons, we proudly support the motion. The proposition pauses.
Our final speaker from Ardenne High, Regina Ellis.
All protocols observed. Mr. Speaker, preventing rights and deny stability. If there is no job stability in the sector, how do we expect to garner economic stability from the sector? The limited representation of tourism workers by trade unions demands striking, and if we prevent striking, as is being purported by the government, workers will resort to other means of industrial action that will reduce the productivity of the sector, thus disrupting the sector, leading to economic turmoil as opposed to economic growth as promoted by the misguided government. Mr. Speaker, we hereby caution the government to take caution when it comes on to making these decisions. How can we say we're growing if an integral part of the workforce that builds up our economy is being left behind? After the Iberia Star Hotel, workers took their placards and demonstrations in October of 2024, there was evident reassurance to return to work by the tourism sector workers, as their cries were finally heard by the Ministries of Labor and Tourism. The grievances stem from tourism workers not receiving substantial gratuity compared to the period of time worked, as well as the lack of union representation. To solve this, we can implement incentives such as improving workers' benefits, such as providing non-taxable gratuities or subsidizing housing for workers. Mr. Speaker, lack of union representation is a knife to the throat, as these workers are already subject to inhumane working conditions, and on top of that, is being subjected to a halt in striking by the government. The government argues that preventive striking will disrupt the sector, but we as opposition are arguing that preventing striking will continue to disrupt the lives of the tourism workers. Mr. Speaker, the workers from the industry can't pour from an empty cup. And we as side opposition refuse to turn a blind eye to the systematic issues that have plagued the sector for years. If we want to prevent disruptions, we must solve the issues from the root by addressing the inequalities that exist and by providing livable wages and fringe benefits, especially given current status quo where majority of workers are care. opposition remain resolute to providing actual solutions as opposed to mere band-aid policies, as is being purported by the government. The proposition may try to say that these benefits are not feasible due to the abundance of multinational corporations which exist within our nation. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not but excuses for their inaction. In a recent article by The Gleaner, we see that our Minister of Tourism announced expanded benefits after a meeting with Bertol, one of the leading actors in the tourism sector in the Caribbean, managing hotels such as Rio Chain. Bertol agreed to help improve workers' conditions, showing the willingness of stakeholders to facilitate this partnership. In conclusion, while the intention behind restricting strikes in the tourism sector may be to prevent immediate disruptions, such measures are not only ineffective, but counterproductive in the long run. They fail to address the root causes of worker dissatisfaction, risk driving away skilled labor, and conceal systematic issues that ultimately harm the industry's sustainability. By safeguarding workers' rights and improving their working conditions, we not only uphold ethical standards, but also promote a thriving tourism sector that benefits all stakeholders. Therefore, I urge the proposition to abandon this senseless motion and join us in creating a more holistic approach to strengthening our tourism industry. The opposition momentarily rests.
Thank you so very much. Students, please keep your cameras on while you prepare your rebuttals. You'll be given 3 minutes. And when we will return with the opposing team, which will be Ardenne High. Please remember that your rebuttals receive full marks. So this is an opportunity to come back with your arguments. Thank you. Students, are you ready? Knox, are you ready? Ardenne, are you ready?
Yes, we are.
All right, so I want to congratulate both of you. You're doing very well, right? Very well with your arguments. I'm very impressed. Let me find out if the judges are ready. And we are back. Let us see. Judges, are we ready?
Yes.
Yes, I'm ready.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's a heated debate. Should the workers in the tourism sector, should they be restricted in their ability to strike? Well, Ardenne High and Knox College, they have come up with some very good arguments this afternoon, and we will now return with Ardenne High, who is proposing the motion for their rebuttals. Go ahead, Ardenne High.
All protocols observed. Now, I would like to do a rebuttal for the opposition as I have the honor. Now, the first thing I'd like to point out is that on the side of proposition, the first speaker said it's a freedom, not a right. But then the second speaker said we are regulating the right. This is a flip-flopping proposition, Mr. Speaker, that cannot even understand their own stance. And now the second speaker, trying to be their pessimistic selves on the proposition, painting this picture up there, said that strikes will dissuade future investors. But this has been untrue, as there have still been 1.6 million visitors coming to the nation. And was also mentioned something that I must address, as we cannot have an unconstitutional government stand. That the proposition has been trying to say that Section 13A and Section 13B does not give the right to strike, but instead freedom of peaceful assembly and association. But would this not undergo the definition of a strike? And then proposition is further saying that it is a freedom that they shall restrict. But how can you restrict a freedom? That makes no sense. And they have also been sidestepping section number 87 of the International Labour Organization, which we as Jamaicans are signatories. And I don't know about the proposition, but we on opposition stand on the decisions of our people. Now, it is also important for me to mention just how, and just the fact that the proposition has been touching on mediation versus arbitration. But tourism is a sector that is very much so time-bound. And if these issues are not addressed, when the invisible forms of protest start to arise, we shall see the negative effects far more quickly than arbitration or mediation shall end. And it's also important for us to mention that inside opposition, we have not denied these means, as we have very much so mentioned them and expanded them further than proposition. But we understand that the threat of strikes is essential if we want for agencies to act quickly to ensure that our workers shall not start protesting in ways that we cannot see. And there has also been the supposition by the proposition that workers are essential. But I know no tourism worker that has ever given me light, nor can I say that there's ever been one and still working for a different sector. So there is a lie being put down by the proposition, as we are not saying that tourism workers are not essential, but there is indeed the fact that they are not giving us the things that we need in our day-to-day lives, but are instantly said that we should know the difference between the facts that they are integral to the economy, but not essential to our daily lives, which I would hope the proposition knows, as anybody with a basic command of the English language should be able to understand the difference therein. Now, to end, for the side of rebuttal of opposition, this motion is simply unconstitutional by the proposition. It fuels expectation, and it is delusional to think silencing the workers will fix tourism. For a silent worker is a disrespected worker, and no government built on disrespect will stand. And that is why we as side opposition, Mr. Speaker, are the right decision. The opposition rests.
Can I begin now?
Please go ahead, Knox College.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition would have failed to retain any information provided by the proposing House. Firstly and primarily, there is no constitutional right being infringed upon by these regulations. And yes, a freedom can technically be regulated as it has been done within many countries. We've given you a plethora of examples. We've given you France, we've given you the Bahamas, we've given you Germany, we've given you Sweden, and we've given you Russia. Mr. Speaker, regulations do not remove the ability to strike. We must restate for the opposition that these workers are ultimately suffering due to structural failures and the lack of proper representation. The opposition is idyllic in the sense that they believe that Jamaica has the economic ability to withstand unregulated striking actions, even though we have proved time and time again that we do not. In even larger countries with far more robust economies and greater safeguards, the failure has been immense. Mr. Speaker, ultimately, the lack of worker representation is what creates the need for these strikes. But in execution, the economic consequences are debilitating for these workers in action. We would have established, Mr. Speaker, that these workers are not safeguarded from wage cuts or layoffs, as these businesses would struggle to readjust because of industrial action. This, Mr. Speaker, was left completely unaddressed by the opposition. Additionally, it is necessary to restate the economic importance of the tourism sector has afforded it and its workers the title of an essential sector. Again, it is important to note that despite the arguing against regulations, the opposition ultimately agreed that alternative actions are more effective than strikes alone. Therefore, considering the economic risk of unregulated strikes and the unanimous agreement that there are more safe and holistically thorough means of addressing these structural issues, then what is the issue to be had? In regards to the issue of strikes being a final resort, the opposition seemed to portray this as a gotcha for the proposing House. However, ultimately, it was addressed in our model that this was the general consensus. Strikes, Mr. Speaker, amongst their other requirements, would be restricted to a last resort after negotiations. Listen, please. Strikes, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, ultimately, it is evident that the opposition is confused. Strikes are not a solution. They are a detriment to the workers, and they are a band-aid solution to the other issues within the economy and the country. Additionally, it must be acknowledged that what we want is the same thing. However, the issue at hand is that the opposition is myopic and idyllic with a false play at altruism that ultimately does not benefit the country or its people. Mr. Speaker, in agreeing with the proposition's definitions of key terms, the opposition has agreed that restrictions do not remove, that regulations can be abided by as per our model, and that the workers are ultimately at risk due to the consequences of unregulated striker action. Ultimately, they ignored the many statistics outlining the economic damages posed to the citizens and falsely portrayed these strikes as a legitimate solution to the issues within the industry. Let us close by reminding the House that the priority is the people, and whilst the economic pressure does create results, it also creates long-term consequences that are ultimately experienced primarily by the people. Therefore, mediation and arbitration are better solutions, as would have been unanimously agreed upon and would have been portrayed by the model posited by side proposition. Mr. Speaker, these are better solutions that should be used alternatively to supplement these workers' actions and allow them greater bargaining power, contrary to what the opposition would have stated, that we are trying to restrict bargaining power. No, Mr. Speaker, bargaining power is actually enhanced in the proposal from the perspective of the proposing House. Mr. Speaker, side proposition realistically considers the state of the Jamaican people, the economy, and considers the risk posed to the country and the industry, whilst ultimately allowing for greater and more effective alternatives to be addressed and enhanced. On this, Mr. Speaker, side proposition pauses, and we hope that you would have understood that the opposing House is myopic, idyllic, and ultimately short-sighted in their perspective. We thank you.
Let's have a round of applause, please. I think the judges are going to have a very difficult time with this match. And while they prepare for their deliberation, we will return with the winning scores. Congratulations to Ardenne High and Knox College. You guys did very well. Thank you. The judges had a very, very difficult time. We were in that room. And I know this is a difficult one for them. Before we move into the announcements of the scores, let's just thank our sponsors, gifts from the Tourism Enhancement Fund, the GHTA, Wards Transportation, Pair One, Royalton Resorts, Moon Palace, and Fontana Pharmacy. We will now ask Tafari Hilton, Judge Tafari Hilton, to begin, then Gabe Watt, and then Malik Kalia. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just pull up my notes. Wow. Okay. Boy, I tell you, this was a really hot match. Knox and Ardenne, I want you guys to actually give yourselves a round of applause. You guys had us arguing in as judges, going back and forth. So excellently done by both teams. All right, so now let's get into it. At first glance, this motion does look like one team has the edge over the other. However, we would just like to explicitly state that both teams argued exceptionally well. Knox contextualized, redefined, set parameters. Ardenne challenged, they dug deep, set the grounds, asked to recontextualize and distinguish. And for me, the standout points really are Knox, you guys did well with contextualizing the motion. You're saying that we are not restricting per se. Say you're saying that we're not eliminating, we just want to regulate, and then you give us a outline to how this regulation would work. You're saying that notice, strike should be the last thing done, need union representation, blah, blah, blah. You gave us the reasons as well to say that the reason why strikes often occur is due to a lack of union representation. Therefore, we're going to fix that. That was a major point. Ardenne, you guys did exceptionally well in asking the question, what is the difference between right to strike and freedom to associate, to which Knox did not really provide a clear answer, Toto, because freedom to associate would include striking, organizing, coming together. Therefore, how do you now tackle that? That was an excellent point. Done. However, your third speaker now, which I think would have been your weakest argument, almost the entirety of the third speaker's speech feeds into the argument of Knox. Knox already said that based on the data, many strikes occur because there's a lack of union rep. When there's no one to represent you, like the middleman, you're not heard. Therefore, you are going to strike. But if you have the union rep, you are being heard. Knox already said we're going to implement that right across the board. Your third speaker agrees to say that strikes occur because there's no union rep, then goes ahead to outline their inclusion of this new plan, which is the same thing that Knox already gave us. So I think you guys should have taken a different argument for the third speaker, because then your argument could not have been better fleshed out, and that actually hits you in the knee, right? Unfortunately. Last point from me, second speaker for Summer, you answered the POIs better. However, you didn't really give a clear answer. You just kind of turn it back into your argument. And I think if you had used that chance to clearly distinguish right to strike and freedom to associate, that would have helped your argument much better too, because then you gave Ardenne the leeway to sow doubt into what you mean and how your plan will be. For Ardenne's first speaker, I'm not sure if it's because you started off with your rebuttal, but Dr. Tari, you were a bit shaken up. You did not answer the POIs well, which were very important POIs for you guys to answer. So once again, work on that, but that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Watt.
All right, afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Both teams did very well. The arguments are strong from both sides, and I think this is probably the best match that I've had to judge our competition. I think the arguments were sound. However, you know, I'm not sure if you guys spent enough time getting an understanding of labor laws and how unions work, which is what usually leads to a strike. So for example, I'm not using the tourism sector, this is the teaching sector. You have some teachers who are a part of the JT and some who are not, and as a result, some of them are allowed to strike by whatever means the JTA is saying, because they can be defended by them, while others are not allowed to strike in the same manner. As a part of a member group, you know, Sandals, we are part of the Sandals group. We are not unionized in that regard, but you do have some hotel workers or resources that is used in the sector where persons are unionized. Workers in the hotel sector are not just limited to persons who are directly employed to a hotel. Remember that some of these hotels outsource their services. So they'll outsource sometimes towel cleaning, sanitization, stuff like that. And those persons form a part of the hotel sector. And I can speak to that because my dad was in charge for years of the sanitization system for most of the hotels on the North Coast. So when they're designing them in terms of where to put the skips or garbage or place garbage on the property so that it can be collected property, he was a part of that. And the company that he worked with was unionized. So while he was definitely in the sector in that regard, so when COVID came and it shut down, it affected him because they never have nothing to go collect and sanitize. You know, he wasn't directly employed to a hotel. I think the arguments from both teams were strong, though. I think this is worthy of a final. I'd also say as well, excellent use of the definitions. I think I want to highlight Ardenne's first speaker for the way he crafted or demonstrated his understanding of setting the trap that Knox kind of fell into today for me, where, you know, you outline that we have the freedom to assemble, and you give examples of that, bringing the strike there. Knox, I think, you know, as the government, if you're coming with a policy as well, they need to be more forceful. If you are saying that there needs to be restrictions that prevent people from striking, that argument must be fair and sound. And you, I think for the most part, you try to outline all of the measures that were listed. However, though, when Ardenne came back to say, listen, you know, we've had these things in place, but it still led to strikes last year in the sector, I don't think he effectively responded to that. All in all, though, solid arguments from both sides, and all the best to the side that is moving on.
Good afternoon, team.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. You have the task. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Tola. Good afternoon, Knox and Ardenne. Very well played match, as both my colleague judges have said. My few jottings that I have really caused quite a debate amongst us as judges as well. So that's a good sign that both teams have really performed very creditably. For Knox, I started off by writing that she signposted very well. You delineated the effects of strikes and even recent ones, and highlighted as the government's posture that there's no right to strike, but a freedom, and really created that signposting for us to understand and appreciate, you know, that what the government wants is regulation of that type of activity, and it is all about protecting the freedom while still benefiting the economy. And I thought it was a very commendable and clear outline of what the posture of the government was. Ardenne again also started off very strong with the leader of the opposition. He addressed or started off by addressing some of the posture of the opposition, the proposition, my apologies. You're a little shaky today, Dr. I'm not sure what was happening. And even with some of the points of information, I thought that you never pivoted as best as you could in some of them. Nevertheless, you went about redefining and also speaking about what is fundamental workers in terms of essential workers versus what you called or extended the posture or position of the opposition in terms of how you contextualize tourist workers and also their value with regards to the economy. You also went through some of the statistics as well and mentioned as well ADR, alternative dispute resolution, as a framework in dealing with the issues. For the second speaker for Knox, you also addressed or raised that somehow the distinction between right and freedom, and also as part of pivoting the posture of the government mentioned that, it's not we don't have the luxury of recklessness in how you determine or explain that striking is a part of that type of activity. It would cause recklessness and obviously, as your Prime Minister mentions, affect economic welfare and economic well-being. But as you're saying, you don't want, as the motion was transcribed, to remove, but rather to regulate. And in so regulating, you went through some comparators, looking at developed countries such as Singapore and Germany to try and compare it with what could be or obtained in the Commonwealth Caribbean or in Jamaica as a developing country. For Ardenne, second speaker, it was very commendable that you went through quoting the International Labour Organization and the relevant international relations and effects, Jamaica being a signatory to that body or that type of employment law or labor law scenario that creates so different avenues for workers to vent their issues or frustration, especially when it comes on to their welfare and their finances. And you also mentioned alternative means if workers don't get the time to protest that we could capitalize. And I really appreciated how, as part of pivoting the stance of House opposition, you're speaking about this equitable creation of or balance between the rights of workers and employers so as to address their wage issues. Knox's third speaker also went through ADR or repeated some of the points about alternative dispute resolution. And I looked at some examples in other countries that could facilitate dealing with the issues. And then Ardenne ended with their third speaker by looking at how counterproductive it would be in the long run. And it doesn't really address worker issues if we go about going through strikes per se. And so what we should be focusing on, as you said, is now safeguarding worker rights so as to try and promote and help in the thriving of the tourism sector. So I think both teams came with very good arguments, whether it's a right or freedom by virtue of the Constitution. I know it's a point that you were trying to struggle with, but the beauty about it is, even if you never came out explicitly to say it, what is important to appreciate is, as you rightfully stated, it's not a right, it's a freedom, and the freedom is the freedom of association, which ergo, as Gave mentioned and Tapar mentioned, is the right to associate. And so when you're thinking about rights generally, if you're putting in place a limitation or a restriction, there must be some justification in the public's interest. So that is something we'd have wanted to hear further from both teams. What is the specific justification we're putting in if we do or not to take out strikes as part of the bargaining process for hotel workers? So commendable efforts by both. Additionally, remember your protocols when it comes on to one use of time. I find I could tell that the third speakers for both teams, I don't feel like you finished or exhausted your time. Remember, you use up as much of your time as possible. I feel like when you finish, I was waiting for something more. And also remember your protocols again about this style of debating. And I think one speaker, I think it was Ardenne, second speaker who pointed it out. Be careful of badgering because that also affects your overall points. And also be careful of when you attempt to ask a point of information, because points of information times are protected at your first minute and the last minute of your opposing speaker. So you have to also be mindful, though you want to hit home with a point of information as a strategy to assist your team, you have to ensure that you are not in the protected person's minute. And also, apart from just dealing with that in terms of a point of information, remember as well, keep your blinkers on as you anticipate what is the essence of this point of information. Even if it feels like the person is meandering and going along, pick out the word and hold on to that word in your response. So you're not taken off track, and then you can go back on track in addressing your specific house's posture. So in the round, the judges' scores have been tabulated, and we have Knox College with 1,007 points, and Ardenne High School with 962 points, with Knox College's first speaker, Janae Scott, as best speaker, and Ardenne High School's Dr. Doman as commendable speaker, as well as Summer Anderson showing most improvement over this period of time. And so congratulations to both teams. We congratulate Knox College and Ardenne High School for very commendable efforts and for reaching this far in the competition. Over to you, Ms. Tolo.
I'm so happy I don't have to deliver those points But congratulations, Ardenne High and Knox College. We will announce the third place winner who will also receive prizes. Knox College will now join Charlemont High for the finals of the National Tourism Debate 2024. Congratulations to Coach Dehaney and Coach Franz of Ardenne High. I'm your host, Michelle Toller. Thank you, judges, and thank you, sponsors. Until next time.